Part 1. The Hidden Depths of Solitude. What if I told you that your quiet nature, your preference for solitude, your discomfort in crowds, is not a flaw but a profound sign of intelligence that most people never recognize? What if the very things you consider weaknesses are actually the markers of a rare psychological and philosophical depth? You're about to embark on a journey into the hidden architecture of your own mind. This isn't just about being an introvert or liking your own company. This is about discovering the insane, almost mystical signs that you are a highly intelligent loner without even knowing it. Imagine this: a child sitting alone under a tree at recess, watching the other kids play, not because they feel rejected, but because they're fascinated by observing. They're not lonely, they're studying the patterns of human behavior. That child grows into someone who doesn't seek validation from others, but instead seeks truth. Maybe that child was you, or maybe it still is. And if that resonates, then wait, because what we're about to uncover will shake the foundations of how you see yourself. The first insane sign is this: you think in layers, not lines. Most people think linearly. They follow step-by-step logic, cause and effect, action and reaction. But if you're a highly intelligent loner, your mind doesn't work like that. You think in spirals and webs, in patterns that overlap. You can see the connections between abstract ideas that others totally miss. This can make conversation exhausting because how can you explain a thought that has 1,000 roots? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." You see those threads between philosophy, psychology, life, and even death. But do others? This leads us to another insane sign. You feel more connected to ideas than people. This isn't because you hate people, far from it. It's because ideas don't lie to you. They don't manipulate, they don't betray. While others are drawn to gossip, drama, and small talk, you crave meaning. You crave conversations that touch on the eternal questions. What is consciousness? Is free will an illusion? Why does suffering exist? And if no one around you wants to ask those questions, you'd rather be alone. Can you relate to that? And if so, are you sure you're not running from people or running toward truth? Let me ask you something deep, something most people never dare to consider. If you could only speak one sentence for the rest of your life, what would it be? That's the kind of question a highly intelligent loner asks, not out of curiosity, but as a way to strip life down to its essence. You see, the third sign is this: you are obsessed with essence. You don't care for appearances, for status, or for the social games people play. You want to know what something is, not what it looks like. That's why small talk feels suffocating. It doesn't touch the essence. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." You know this. You live this. You aren't interested in who people pretend to be. You want to know what they've made of themselves.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's the paradox. You want deep connection, yet you fear being misunderstood. That's the fourth sign. You crave intimacy, not physical, but intellectual and spiritual intimacy. You want someone who sees the same mysteries you do. But you've been misunderstood so many times that now silence feels safer. So you isolate, not out of arrogance, but out of emotional self-defense. You've tasted the pain of explaining your soul and receiving a blank stare in return, so you retreat. But in that retreat, you grow, you study, you evolve. And every time you return to the world, you've changed so much that no one recognizes you anymore, not even your past self. Let me tell you a story. There was once a monk who isolated himself in a cave for 7 years. When he returned, people swore he could read minds, but he simply said, I just spent enough time with my own. The fifth insane sign is this. You have an inner world so rich, it could be a universe. You daydream, not as escapism, but as exploration. You dwell in thought experiments, simulate entire dialogues, create mental philosophies that rival the work of great thinkers. You may not share them, but they shape you. And you know what's truly insane? That inner world often feels more real than the external one. But this leads to danger. Because when your mind is this powerful, it can also be your prison. That's the sixth sign. You battle existential dread more often than anyone knows. You're not afraid of death, but you are haunted by meaninglessness. You've stared into the abyss, and sometimes it stares back. Albert Camus said, "The only serious philosophical question is whether to commit suicide." You've probably asked yourself that not from despair, but from a relentless need to understand if life is truly worth it. And yet, you endure. You endure because some part of you believes that even without meaning, there can still be beauty. And now we arrive at the seventh and final sign. For this part of the journey at least, you are an alchemist of solitude. While others fear being alone, you transmute it into gold. Solitude doesn't drain you, it awakens you. In your stillness, you find clarity. In your silence, you hear the universe whispering truths others miss in the noise. You've learned that loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of understanding. And when you begin to understand yourself, solitude becomes sacred. So we ask you now, are you truly alone? Or are you just ahead of your time? You see, being a highly intelligent loner is not about ego. It's not about superiority. It's about perceiving life at a depth that most people never touch. You're not broken. You're not weird. You're tuned into frequencies that others cannot hear. And yes, it's beautiful, but it's also burdensome. Intelligence is heavy. Insight is isolating. But if you've made it this far, you're not just intelligent. You're brave. Because most people run from themselves, but you confront yourself in the mirror of silence. Let me leave you with this. What if your isolation is not a punishment, but a preparation? What if the universe is shaping you in secret, forging you in fire? Because your purpose is not for the shallow but for the sacred. If this resonates, then you already know. And if you don't yet know, then stay with us. Because in part 2, we're going deeper. Into the shadows, into the madness, into the sacred silence where the truly intelligent loners are born. Part 2, into the sacred madness of the mind. So you've made it this far. That alone says something rare about you. You're not just curious, you're willing to explore the forbidden chambers of your psyche. That's not normal. That's not easy. Most people stop at the surface, but the highly intelligent loner? They dive into the abyss, not to drown, but to map it. And that's where we go now, deeper into the sacred madness. The kind of madness that only the truly aware have the courage to walk through. Let's start with something terrifying. You question the very structure of reality. This isn't philosophical posturing, it's existential necessity. You've had moments, maybe walking alone at night or lying in bed in silence, when you suddenly feel like everything is unreal. The people, the conversations, the routines, like a dream you can't wake from. You wonder, what if this is all a simulation? What if my consciousness is trapped inside a narrative I didn't choose? That's not insanity. That's the sign of a mind that refuses to be imprisoned by appearances. As Plato said in the Republic, how can you prove whether at this moment we are sleeping and all our thoughts are a dream, or whether we are awake and talking to one another in the waking state? You've lived that question. You still do. This leads to the next insane sign. You're magnetized by contradiction. While others crave certainty, you find beauty in paradox. You understand that truth isn't always clean, it's messy, it's layered, it contradicts itself. You see that humans can be both cruel and compassionate, that love can coexist with resentment, that freedom can feel like a prison if it lacks purpose. This mental flexibility is rare. It means you can hold opposing ideas in your mind without needing to resolve them. Aristotle called this sophrosyne, a balance of reason and emotion. You live it. And in doing so, your solitude becomes a crucible for wisdom. Another powerful sign is this: you feel time differently. When you're alone, a single hour can feel like a lifetime. Not because you're bored, but because your mind expands into that space. You stretch moments like elastic, filling them with thought, reflection, and imagination. And when you're around others, time can either speed up or become unbearably slow depending on the depth of the interaction. This is not just introversion. This is temporal sensitivity. It's what mystics, monks, and philosophers have described for millennia. As Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "The thinker without a paradox is like a lover without feeling, a paltry mediocrity." You don't just think, you feel time. And you often wonder, am I living in the same world as everyone else? Or have I slipped into some deeper layer of existence? And then comes the shadow side, one that most never see. You carry a deep, unspoken sadness. It's subtle. It doesn't always show, but it's there. The sadness that comes from seeing too much, feeling too deeply, and knowing that most people will never understand what you carry. It's not depression, it's awareness. You've seen behind the curtain. You know that life is fragile, that joy is fleeting, that connection is rare. And yet, you don't collapse. You embrace. That's the mark of a highly intelligent loner, not that they avoid suffering, but that they transform it. Think of Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning in a concentration camp. He said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." You've done this. You've turned pain into philosophy. But here's where it gets even more profound. You often feel like a ghost in your own life. Not because you're invisible, but because you're watching. You observe more than you participate. You walk through crowds, through conversations, through routines, and you feel detached, like you're studying a species that isn't quite your own. That's not arrogance, it's awareness. You're aware of how people perform roles, wear masks, say things they don't mean. And you wonder, when did I stop playing? When did I step outside the game? This detachment is both a superpower and a curse. It gives you insight, but it also isolates you. And yet you wouldn't trade it. Because being awake, even in solitude, is better than being asleep in the crowd. And now we touch on the sixth sign. You are repelled by inauthenticity. It's not just a preference, it's almost physical. You feel it in your gut when someone is being fake, when a conversation is superficial, or when a person's energy doesn't match their words. This hypersensitivity is part of your intelligence. You pick up on micro-expressions, tone shifts, and emotional dissonance. It's exhausting. But it also means you can spot truth from lies in seconds. You may not always speak up, but deep down you know. And this knowing alienates you. Because once you see through the performance, how can you ever pretend again? Let me ask you something powerful. What would happen if you stopped filtering yourself for others? Not in a rebellious way, but in a sacred, authentic way. What if you stopped shrinking your thoughts, your questions, your silence just to make others comfortable? That's one of the silent tragedies of the highly intelligent loner. They've been told they're too much, so they become less. But what if your too much is exactly what the world needs? What if your thoughts are volcanic, your solitude is sacred, and your mind is a temple? The final sign in this part is this: You have a secret longing for transcendence. You may not call it spiritual. You may not even believe in God, but you feel it, that pull towards something beyond logic, beyond language. Maybe it's in nature, or music, or meditation. Maybe it's in those moments when everything goes quiet and you feel like you've touched the edge of the infinite. You long for more than survival. You long for meaning, for a reason, for a glimpse of the eternal behind the veil of the ordinary. And in that longing, you are not weak. You are ancient. You are part of a lineage of seekers, sages, and silent revolutionaries. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a haunting truth. Highly intelligent loners are the unacknowledged mystics of modern life. You walk among crowds with your headphones in, your eyes distant, your thoughts racing through dimensions most people will never touch. You read books that make others yawn. You cry at ideas. You feel the weight of humanity's contradictions in your chest. And yet you continue. You create. You reflect. You dream. You're not broken. You're not weird. You're not lost. You are becoming. And this becoming is not loud. It is not flashy. It is sacred. It is cosmic. It is lonely, but it is real. So the next time someone says you're too quiet, too intense, too distant, smile. Because they have no idea the universe you carry inside you. And maybe they never will, but you will. Part 3. The Metamorphosis from Isolation to Illumination. You've come this far, and that alone makes you part of a rare few. You've passed through the corridors of solitude, shadowed by existential weight, shaped by paradox, and haunted by truths that most people never dare to face. But now, something begins to shift. You see, the journey of the highly intelligent loner isn't meant to end in isolation. No. It was always a metamorphosis, an initiation into a higher mode of being. If you've ever felt like your loneliness had a purpose, a hidden destiny, you were right. Now we reveal what that purpose is. Let's start with this realization. Your solitude has secretly been training you for leadership. That may sound insane. After all, how can someone who avoids the crowd lead it? But think about it. You've spent years, maybe decades, studying human nature, not from the center of the stage, but from the balcony. You've seen the patterns, the illusions, the lies people tell themselves. You've built discernment. You've learned to think independently, to question dogma, to stand alone. And in a world drowning in noise and false idols, the person who can stand alone in truth becomes the only one worth following. As Lao Tzu said, a leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, "We did it ourselves." That's you. That's your power. Quiet, invisibly. But here's another insane truth. You've already impacted others more than you realize just by being you. You think your silence goes unnoticed. You think your thoughts have no audience. But people feel your energy. They notice the way you don't react like everyone else. They sense that your values run deeper, your presence quieter, but more grounded. You may never be the loudest voice in the room, but you are often the most listened to, not because you speak often, but because when you do, it's from a place of inner clarity. And that clarity born of solitude is magnetic. You've become a mirror. Others see themselves more clearly around you, and they don't even know why. Let me ask you something transformative. What if your isolation was never about escaping the world, but about preparing to heal it? That is the final metamorphosis of the highly intelligent loner. You retreat not to hide, but to refine. You suffer not in vain, but to develop compassion. You see the darkness not to be consumed by it, but to understand it so that one day, when someone else is lost, you can guide them back to light. Carl Jung once said, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that becoming is not easy. It requires breaking, rebuilding, silence, stillness, and finally, emergence. Which brings us to the next level of your transformation. You've developed an inner compass that no one can corrupt. While others chase trends, approval, power, you've cultivated integrity, authenticity, sovereignty. You make decisions not based on what's popular, but on what's true. And that truth is often quiet. It doesn't shout. Petit tendero. You've learned to trust your intuition, even when it goes against the herd. You've learned to say no without needing to justify yourself. You've learned to walk away from toxic people, from shallow conversations, from environments that dim your fire. Why? Because your solitude taught you something priceless. You'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people in illusion. But this transformation comes with a price. You may never fully fit in, and that's okay. You're not here to fit. You're here to witness, to question, to evolve, to disturb the comfortable, to comfort the disturbed. You are the outsider who sees the flaws in the system, the rebel who doesn't wear rebellion like a costume, the mystic who doesn't need a robe. You are what the ancient world revered as a seer, not because you predict the future, but because you see reality beneath its masks. And that sight is your gift, but it's also your burden. Because once you've seen the truth, you can never go back to sleep. And still, you love, you feel, you hope, because despite your cynicism, despite your philosophical scars, you still believe in beauty. You still find peace in a quiet sunrise or in a passage of a book that touches your soul. You still believe that some people are real, that some moments are sacred, that some truths are worth suffering for. And that belief, fragile as it may be, is what makes you human, not just intelligent, not just aware, but vulnerable, open, alive. Here's the final insane sign we must reveal. You are building a legacy in silence. You may not be famous. You may not have followers. But your life, your thoughts, your reflections, your quiet acts of integrity are creating ripples. You write that poem that only 3 people read, but one of them never forgets it. You say something honest to a friend, and it changes the course of their life. You refuse to betray your soul, and that small act becomes a beacon for someone else. You are a guardian of the unseen. And in a world obsessed with attention, you are proof that impact does not require applause. Let me leave you with this final philosophical question. If the universe gave you this mind, this solitude, this depth, what are you going to do with it? Will you hide it for fear of being misunderstood? Or will you let it shine, even if only for a few? Remember, the candle doesn't refuse to burn just because the room is empty. It burns anyway, because that is its nature.